thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be a part of this community. And that brings me to the first observation about what we mean today by inequality. We know that inequality within most developing countries is increasing. We also know that the inequality on the globe overall is actually shrinking, primarily because of very rapid economic development in India, China, that is narrowing the gap between the wealthy economies, the wealthiest economies and economies of India and China, where a very large share of world's population lives. So when we think about inequality, when we think about those trends, let's say nobody's incomes actually changed. Let's imagine for a second that everybody's income stayed the same, but the notion of communities changed because of technology that we are using that's enabling teleconferences, because of the technology that allows communication and remote work. So right now I'm speaking today from my home in Berkeley, California, and some of you are in China, and some of you are in New York City, and some of you may be in Europe, and we are thousands of miles away, but we are part of the same community, and very much so. I recognize faces. I'm happy to be here talking to you. So I am surely a member of this community, just as much, actually more so, than I'm a member of my neighborhood association. So then the question is, if we are now members of communities that are not limited even by nation-state boundaries, how should we think about relevant comparison group for ourselves? So what, even in the world where incomes didn't change, once we break the boundaries of communities, how do we feel about inequality? So I don't know the answer to this question. That's one of the problems that technology kind of throws in front of us, left, front, and center. So today we live in a relatively prosperous world. There are more people than ever. There is less hunger than ever. It's all great. But technology changes the way we live. It destroys some jobs, creates new jobs. We are all part of that process. So I think when you look at sort of income inequality and technological change in the 20th century, you see that a lot of that is driven by trade. And I'll mention some of that with kind of back in the olden days, the Sears-Reebok catalog kind of create trade where that creates a lot of value, also creates a lot of disruption for a lot of businesses. So, well, we live in a similar era, but now something else, and of course, throughout 20th century, you see lots of that, right? You see manufacturing moving to China, manufacturing moving to Thailand, to India, outside of the US, you see many other new jobs emerging, you see winners and losers. But all of that, primarily the interface between countries at that time is through the channel of trade. So today, I think we are entering a new era where not only goods can be moving through state boundaries, but also labor could be moving through state boundaries without us physically moving anywhere. And well, that's a new page in the history of the world's economy, and that change is, of course, made possible by wonderful communication technologies and information technologies that are coming online. And overall, I very much agree with Professor Townsend. It's a very positive thing for the mankind in the long run, but again, in the short run, there are winners and there are losers. So wait, how many minutes do I have left?
7.
Okay. So that brings me to kind of the next really important. So obviously right now, kind of this movement of labor where people work remotely, in some ways it's a very new thing. We just started doing it at scale during the pandemic. And of course it was sort of coming for a very long time. And let's see how long ago it started. If you look at most software companies, people at Microsoft, people at Google, people at Facebook and Amazon and Apple, until very recently, nobody worked remotely. So you can say, well, we just discovered remote work was possible very recently. Well, in some ways it's true. In some ways it's completely false. Let's look at one of the most influential software projects of the like 20th century, early 21st century. And I would say that would be development of Linux. Almost all of it was done remotely. And that was many, many years ago. So the possibility of remote work was there, but to a very large extent, it just wasn't work, right? A lot of Linux development was done by developers who were in some ways donating their time, or someone else was donating the time. So the work itself became remote very recently, but in some ways, the possibility of creating software by remote workers was there for more than 20 years. Okay, so moving on. So what does remote work means for sort of inequality, and what does Microsoft do in terms of that? So let me give you a few examples of kind of what we as a company do to create a more inclusive world. And I think that, to a large extent, we can say, well, it's the job of the government to do those things. The job of private corporations is just to profit maximize. And I don't believe that. I think that the large companies like us have social responsibility to make a world a better place. And they're doing a lot of that in various dimensions. Some of them are very local. So, for example, Microsoft contributed $250 million towards creating affordable housing in Seattle, next to our headquarters. That's where we are. That's our home, and we are doing a lot of things to kind of promote more equitable life there. But then there's a bigger question. So, what about the world as a whole? Well, we couldn't solve world's problems, but we can do something. And let me give you a few examples that I'm actually really proud of that Microsoft is doing. So first, well, as you know, LinkedIn is part of Microsoft. In fact, my team does a lot of work in collaboration with LinkedIn. And one of the things that LinkedIn does that I think people never talked about, but I think it's really important. One of the things for creating kind of harmonious society is having a society where there is not, where people feel in some ways fulfilled. People don't feel like the anger is amplified. People feel some harmony. And when you go to some social network, you see that they grab engagement by promoting things that get people angry. Well, start using LinkedIn. LinkedIn algorithms deliberately designed to kind of create a very civilized experience at the cost of engagement. And I'm mentioning it here as part of kind of inclusive society, because really I think that's a big part of it. One of the reasons that kind of our governments often couldn't deliver on creating more inclusive societies because we Kind of, we are very politically divided in many ways. We need social platforms that would create cohesion rather than division. Here's another wonderful thing that LinkedIn does that probably most of you never heard about. LinkedIn tries to lower digital divide by creating thousands of courses, by partnering with other companies and creating thousands of courses, many of them targeted for people with low skills. And those courses, you can learn anything. You can learn how to video edit. You can learn how to audio edit. You can learn how to do secretarial tasks. You can learn some Python and some basic data science. You can learn a lot of things. And those courses, we are trying to promote those courses. Many of them are very short. They could be half an hour, 4 hours. And they help people to create skills and lower the digital divide, which I think is really, really important. And that brings me to another point about kind of this world without distance, world when remote work is possible. On one hand, this remote work gives opportunities to anywhere in India, in West Virginia, and in California. And yet you see most remote workers live in very affluent areas. People who in theory have opportunity in areas that may be less developed actually don't get to take advantage of those richer labor markets. Why? Because they lack skills. And that's why kind of we are really trying to partner with both municipal organizations and even with other companies to promote that content that could help human development of people who are lower skilled. So that's one of the things that we do. Let me mention very briefly another thing that I'm very proud of that we do. And that's our work on AI ethics. I myself is a member of the ACER committee that kind of tries to create principles for inclusive AI. And to tell you the truth, early on, when kind of I just got involved in that effort, I thought, well, why should we worry about AI algorithms being fair? After all, if there's any unfairness in the marketplace, as Gary Baker's argument would go, there would be an arbitrage opportunity and the market would arbitrage that away. Well, I don't think it actually works like that. And let me give you one example, just an anecdote that convinced me that we really need to worry about AI algorithms being fair. So one of extremely prominent, extremely smart economic theorists, whose name I'm not going to name here, told me that early on in his career, he had Southern accent. He's white, male, but with Southern accent. And he felt that he was extremely penalized by the job market because of that, because people perceived him as stupid. So he actually made an enormous effort to learn how to speak without Southern accent. And he had a very successful career, and he felt it did wonders for him. Well, now let's go to AI algorithms. Now, when we have hundreds of applications for many, many jobs, and we have more and more reliance on AI algorithms for screening that applications, you can have all kinds of biases that could be quite terrible. Let me mention one bias that's relatively innocuous. If you look at AI software that's trained to recognize images, and you look how well it recognizes huskies from wolves, very different animals, but look very similar. Well, it does pretty good. It's about 85% accuracy. So then, looking at explainable AI, researchers try to figure out how that does it. So tweak the picture, see what does it. So it turns out that the main feature that the software was using was snow. So the way that it knew that it's a wolf and not a husky is that there was snow in the background. Remove the snow, And it turned out that you train on snow and not on wolves. So think about it. If your software is not explainable, you may end up doing massive amount of discrimination in the labor force, just like my friend with Southern accent was discriminated early on in his career. And the arbitrage wouldn't really be kicking in that strongly, or maybe not at all, because if you're making lower job offers to people because you perceive them being inferior in some way, well, everybody else also makes them lower job offers. So there's not a huge benefit from increasing them. And unless there's a very strong, some kind of performance feedback signal, it could take generations for those kind of inequalities to go away. So I think I'm out of time, but I would like to conclude with paraphrasing the quote from Homer Simpson. Technology, cause of and solution to all life's